That was for you, Mr. Bryson. I bring the, ooh, can we fix that? We just did. You are. Thank you, Madam Clerk, and I appreciate the excellent solutions that our tech staff has provided us and that you're implementing. I bring the Assembly Committee of the Whole to order November 6, 2023 at 6:02 p.m. reporting from 155 Heritage Way, I will say. Ms. Atkinson, will you please read the land acknowledgement for us?
We would like to acknowledge that the City and Borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunashchish.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to start with our Zoom folks so I can turn the volume up. Walaki Dog.
Here.
And Miss Wall.
Present.
Okay, volume's going back down. Mr. Smith.
Here.
Miss Hughes-Scandies.
Here.
Mr. Bryson.
Present.
Ms. Atkinson.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mayor Weldon. Here. And Chair Hale.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda as written? Seeing none, we'll move on. Are there any changes to the minutes in the packet? Seeing none, those minutes are approved. We will move on to agenda topics. I have our first agenda item is the Mendenhall River flood mitigation, and we will first have a presentation by Manager Kester, Director Koch, on what has been happening, and then we will move on to public testimony. I'd like to, before the presentation, I would like to thank Mr. Bryson for keeping this topic in front of the Public Works and Facilities Committee meeting at every meeting since that flood has happened. So thank you. Ms. Koch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Clerk, I'm not sure who is going to pull up the slides.
Deputy Mayor, maybe while clerk is pulling up the slides, I'd just like to kind of introduce the topic and appreciate the written testimony. That, as you mentioned, the purpose of this meeting is to really gather some public input so that we can continue asking what can CBG do, what can property owners do, and what information do we need, can we as CBJ help gather? And so I want to just acknowledge that the borough has received written testimony as well, and staff will be collating those questions in addition to questions that are brought up tonight, and have a follow-up meeting on that. So did I talk long enough to stall on that one? Hopefully provide information.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Madam Clerk. So my name is Denise Koch. I'm the Director of Engineering and Public Works. And if you could advance to the next slide, please. All right. This presentation is going to be pretty short because we want to give most of the time to the individuals who came here tonight to testify. So it's just 3 slides, but just wanted to give a little bit of context, starting with how did we get here, and some of the actions that local government took. Of course, there was an establishment of an incident command. The assembly moved very quickly to declare a local disaster, which set the stage for the governor to establish a state disaster. That was helpful in bringing in Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, so DMVA, who set up meetings in the Valley to talk about things like individual assistance that was available to impacted homeowners. There was a request made for federal disaster relief to FEMA. That request was unfortunately denied, but we did want to let people know about that. We did invite the National Resource Conservation Service to Juneau to look at the river top to bottom. They came and to try and figure out what sort of which of their programs we might be eligible for in terms of thinking about things like mitigation. They came during the week of September 11th. They are working on a draft report that we expect to receive sometime this month. We have not yet received it. CBJ did things like participate in community cleanups and try and help impacted homeowners that way. CDD also met with our community development department met with impacted homeowners to let them know what the requirements were for permitting. There was some relaxing of permitting in the first 30 days to allow people to do what they needed to do to protect their property in the immediate aftermath. CBJ also put forth that real property exemption or the reassessment. And then we also wanted to support the University of Alaska Southeast. I know that Dr. Aaron Hood and Aaron Jacobs had given a presentation about monitoring to the Committee of the Whole, as well as to the community at large in the Evening at Egan series. They put forth some efforts. They really want to improve their monitoring. We have supported them in those ways. So they've put forth a request for congressionally directed spending. We have sent a letter of support for that congressionally directed spending. They've requested some more funding for monitoring, and we have put forth, there's already an ordinance that was put forth to increase the amount of the CBJ contribution for that monitoring. And Madam Clerk, if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is the where are we now slide. And some of these, there's a patchwork of different programs in terms of whether they are applicable for public property or private property or both. So that's what the color coding is about. So the orange indicates where there's potential assistance available for private property owners. The first one is the low interest disaster loan. So that comes from the federal government. The U.S. Small Business Association came to Juneau, set up shop at the Diamond Park Aquatic Center. They processed different loan applications from both residents as well as from businesses. As of last week, they had processed and approved 17 loans at approximately $1.8 million. FEMA was here last week talking about flood insurance for property owners. They had a public meeting at DZ in the evening. So the state of Alaska, so DMVA has also, we've been working with them on state public assistance. This is assistance just for CBJ public property. So that includes things like the Mendenhall wastewater treatment plant. There is also a NOAA grant, that's the Transformational Habitat Restoration and Coastal Resilience Grant. That lead entity on that application is Southeast Alaska Watershed Council. That is a grant that, if awarded, is a little bit over $5 million. It would benefit both public and private property owners. And Southeast Alaska Watershed Council is really doing a good job in terms of getting a number of different partners together, including CBJ, ADF&G, DNR, Plinkett and Haida. So that would be a very exciting project if that grant were awarded. Then back to NRCS. NRCS, once they give us as I mentioned, they were here during the week of September 11th doing a review of the river and an assessment of what potential programs they have that might be eligible. So we are looking to hear back from them this month. We have also reached out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and I think this is really important because NRCS and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are really the experts in flood mitigation. So we've reached out to them. They have two different programs. One is a Section 14 program that is limited just to public property, and then they have a broader Section 8315 program that's what they call their general investigation. But for both of those U.S. Army Corps of Engineers projects, what we have requested that they do is they come in and do their feasibility study. They offer to do the feasibility studies for up to $100,000 at no cost to CBJ. So we have requested that they come in and do those studies, let us know what's possible from their perspective and what might be a good fit for some of their programs. Madam Clerk, if you have the last slide, please. Okay, so just wanted to end off on the big picture and where we're going. There are some big FEMA grants that we are also investigating. We're really gathering information on this hazard mitigation program and the BRIC program and the flood mitigation assistance program. The thing to remember is that all those programs are FEMA money ultimately. They all come with their own strings, their own nuances. We have a meeting tomorrow with them to talk more about some of those items, but I think the thing to leave you all with is that we are, when we find some good opportunities to apply for with partners for grants, like the NOAA grant, we are doing that. When we have opportunities to work with experts like the Army Corps of Engineers and NRCS, we're inviting them in, we're asking for their expertise to know what's possible. But it's also important to remember that all of these programs, and they differ based on the program, but they will all come with CBJ cost. There'll be staff time to investigate, staff time to fill out applications, varying levels of local match, time on oversight of projects. Some grants come with life cycle maintenance requirements. They differ for each grant, and we're still in the process of getting more of those details on all of those grants, but I think that's important to also remember. I'd say also the very last thing I wanted to leave you with is at the September 18th PWFC meeting, Assemblymember Hale had asked for a list of experts, technical experts on flood mitigation. We have reached out to a number of those experts at DMVA, Army Corps of Engineers, and NRCS, and they stand willing to give presentations or to answer questions based on some of the feedback and comments and questions that we hear today from public comment. I think that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Director Koch. And before I briefly go to the Assembly to see if there are any questions, just to let everyone here know, what we're doing tonight is trying to gather questions and thoughts and ideas from you all, and we will have a follow-up meeting where we have a panel of those experts from the Army Corps of Engineers, from the National Resource Conservation Service, from Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, to address those questions. So that it's a two-phase process that will also be at a committee of the whole, probably in December. So those are the next steps. Are there any brief questions from the Assembly? I'm seeing none. So we will move into public testimony. I have a sheet of people who will be testifying online, and then I'm sure somebody else would provide me with a sheet from the back of a sign-up sheet from the back of the room. Okay, we'll do the online people first. We have Stephen Bradford. Mr. Bradford will bring you in, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Mr. Bradford, if you could raise your virtual hand so that okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay, this is Steve Bradford speaking. Can you hear me?
Okay, Mr. Bradford, we can hear you now. Please state your name, area of town you live, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Start the timer. My name is Steve Bradford. I live at 4401 Riverside Drive. That's the Riverside condos that were severely damaged in the flood. I'm a graduate civil engineer with over 40 years of experience. I'm retired from the Alaska DOT as the chief bridge engineer, so I've lived in Juneau for nearly 50 years. I was pleased to see in the previous presentation that the city is talking to the Corps of Engineers about investigating our flood. I think it's really important that the Corps come in and analyze the river geomorphics. There's been numerous properties armoring their river slopes, and this is going to have a profound effect on the unarmored properties along the river. But while I appreciate the studying and forecasting of future events, I believe we should be taking some proactive steps to control the outflows from these future events. We should not merely stand by and simply advise the public of impending floods. We need to take steps to implement flood controls. We're expecting the gentleman from the university. I watched it on the video on the Zoom, and we're expecting maybe 30 more years of possible outbreak flows. I'm proposing that the city borough of Juneau vigorously seek federal funds and authority to construct an overflow tunnel from the Suicide Basin with an outlet in the Nugget Creek area. This is a distance of approximately 2,300 meters. This overflow tunnel will then only allow the Suicide Basin to hold a small amount of water, thereby minimizing the outbreak flooding, if any, on the Mendenhall. I know there are people in Juneau that are very well experienced at tunneling in rock, so I think people with a lot more experience than myself could speak to the costs and so forth. But I believe we should be, I know we can study these things, but we should be thinking about taking some action. Lisa Murkowski was at our site, observed our damage and so forth. So she's been up and down the river. She's intimately familiar with what happened there, and I think we could get her support. So I would ask that the city vigorously pursue federal funds for a solution to this problem. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bradford, thank you very much for your suggestion, and we will pose that question to the panel to be sure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Next, we would like to bring Deborah Rudis over, and if you don't see Deb's name, you may see Kim Titus's name.
Okay. All right. I think you can hear me now. My name is Deborah Rudis. I live on River Road. I live on the opposite side of the road from the river, so my property was not affected by the flood. I just have a question, a general question, and I'm wondering why there's no emergency type of funding that the city would have to give some short-term emergency funding for property owners that are affected by various catastrophes, such as the Yakalip that occurred this August. I find it sort of disingenuous that the city can spend $150,000 to remove junk cars on a piece of property, but they can't have an emergency fund to help people that are severely affected and financially stressed out because of emergencies such as this. So that's my big question. And I would like to see some discussion about that, or if there is such a possibility of that type of funding, it wouldn't need to rely on immediate state or federal money, but would be CBJ funding. Thank you for listening to my comments.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Rudis. I appreciate it. We will take about a 1-minute break to get the sheet from the back of the room. Rather than butcher this name, I'm just going to ask Andy, who has signed up to testify, to please come up to provide us. Thank you. And Andy, if you could push the button so that that shows green, and then speak directly into the mic like I'm doing, and then tell us your name, part of town you live in, and you've got 3 minutes.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Andy Kamelev. I live on Meander Way. Since I was a kid, actually, when I was a kid, I had a dream that I would have a castle with a moat. And for one day this summer, my dream came true. Basically, now our house, the riverbank on our particular house is reinforced, and that thing held out like Fort Knox during this flood. So our house was fortunately unaffected, also because it sits very high. However, Meander Way, essentially, we had a second river view in the front of our house. And one of the reasons for that, at least I think so. Now, I just want to state that I am not an engineer, nor am I a geologist, but the culverts that were draining out from Meander Way into the river were completely underwater, and that water had absolutely nowhere to go, which is what created this massive flood on Meander Way. Now, again, we got lucky; our house suffered no damage because it sits very high up on the river. But the houses across the street from us, some of them, garage levels got flooded, first levels got flooded. I don't know the extent of the damage; I didn't really ask, but they look like they took on more damage than we did. So we sat in the backyard and we watched the river keep rising and rising and rising until it peaked at about 11 o'clock at night or so, at which point I realized it's not going to get any higher than that. On a normal day, when I stand in my backyard and I look down at the river, I want to say it's at least a 14-foot clearance. On this particular day, there was barely one at the highest point. Now, the reason I bring this up is because our house sits so high, even with the river being as high as it was still pretty far from our house specifically, given the situation. And again, I'm not a geologist, I'm not an engineer, but I have a feeling, based on what I saw and based on where our house is positioned, if these floods get worse, like a lot of these articles are saying that they are, and if the water gets any higher to the point where it hits our house, the city's going to have bigger problems than just our house. At that point, I have a feeling that the entire valley is going to be open to potentially getting flooded, and flooded badly, because at that point, the river is no longer a river. I don't know what the next step above a river is, but it is officially out of the river area. So I think I don't know what kind of exact ideas the city has. Again, not an engineer, not a geologist, but something might have to be done to redirect the flow of the water, or what the gentleman earlier was suggesting about redirecting water from Suicide Basin, because if it gets over the hill where our house is, it's going to be bad. So yeah, that's why, again, I don't know what can be done, but I think every option needs to be looked into to see what can be done about the water flows if this flood gets any worse and if the water potentially gets higher. Because at that point, you're not looking at one or two isolated houses, you're looking at possibly hundreds of houses getting wiped out completely, or at the very least getting really badly damaged. So that's why we got really lucky. Our house didn't suffer, but I thought I came here to let you guys know. Thank you.
Thank you. That your story is really important for everyone to hear. Thank you. And as I said, we are gathering this information, and then we will pose those questions. Thank you. Next, we have Marty McEwen, please. Mr. McEwen, please state your name and area of town you live in, but I know exactly where you live, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay.
I'm Marty McEwen. I live at 4411 Riverside Drive. And I don't have a lot of questions. I've got a little bit of venting, but I do kind of echo what Steve Brad said. Being proactive is what we need to do. And as I have been, and folks at the condos, everybody's been very proactive, but it's come out of their own pocket. So I wrote a little something, but I'm just going to say, fourth generation Alaskan, deep roots in Juneau, Skagway, dating back to the 1890s. Lived in. All right.
Take your time.
I'm not very good at this.
Yeah, please take your time. Yes.
Now, if we're talking about real estate or something, I'm really good at it. Cars, I can do that. All right. My entire family lives in Juneau. I raised all my kids here. I own several businesses, several commercial properties. I feel like I kick in, pay my taxes. And I don't feel like we got much support. Everybody on the river, we didn't, we've got no money coming in from the city, not $1. I didn't get one phone call. I got somebody come up and said, your house is condemned. You can't live in there. So I agree with the lady. There should be some sort of funding. If there's a big fire that goes through downtown, if there's some other major catastrophe, there needs to be something that the city does to support the citizens. So, I'm out $300,000. So I had a lot more, but that's all I got for now. But I don't know. I like to be. I'm not a complainer, but something needs to be done. I mean, I didn't get a phone call. I didn't get an email. I still have. I got, and I appreciate that. I got a form saying, "Hey, let's get a break on your taxes next year." I filled that out. They sent me another one. Blank, just with no, I already filled it out, sent it in. I have my commercial businesses on the river. The bank's getting hammered. There's nothing, the SBA thing, they don't have anything. There was no, or from the state, there was nothing for commercial properties. There's no support. So everybody's having to dip into their pockets and pay to have all just get some riprap. Well, guess what? That's expensive. And that, there were suggestions that let's maybe take the tax or whatnot off the gravel pit. And somebody, I saw, well, that wouldn't be very much. It's only 5%. Well, so what? How about that? How about something? Something's better than nothing.
Mr. McEwen, thank you so much. And you can submit comments, written comments as well. And I am so very sorry for what you've gone through and for this loss. Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to testify at this point? We've gone through our list and we don't have any other people signed up to testify. Would anyone else like to? Please state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay. Howard Jager at 3451 Meander Way. I didn't come with any prepared. I wasn't going to say anything because I said my piece 4 or 5 years ago and it fell on deaf ears. Isn't that interesting? And now we have this gentleman talking about the same thing we talked about 5 years ago. We didn't get any reimbursement for our bank either. We lost 15 to 20 feet of it towards the river, which we could not reclaim. I don't know what they're doing now, but we had to pay the whole bill at the same time. No, there was nothing. I mean, it was a little event then. It only got a few houses, and this water this time was higher than I've lived there 41 years, and it seems like it's. I mean, it has gotten much bigger that run. So I don't know what you can do, but I think the idea of having an overflow, or my grandson told me to tell him to put a tank in there and a line and sell the water to California. So anyway, that's my point. I guess my reason I say this is because nothing went on for those last 4 or 5 years. Everybody along the river, the help from the city was very minimal, other than, well, here's who you have to get your permits from. And when I was trying to get my permit, the fellow from Anchorage that was down here, I said, well, do you think it's he said, you are in a precarious position, as well as the neighbor who testified, and the former neighbor. And it just, and nobody took it until now, maybe. Now maybe they see what it does. I don't know. But our riprap held up very, very good. But I can tell you this, if it gets hit by many more 150 or 110 foot, or whatever those trees are, I mean, when it hit those babies, it was cracking, popping, and one of them went up clear up in the former Bill Hudson's yard. I don't know if you know that or not. Took out a fence, and the thing turned and went on down the river, fence and all. So anyway, that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Is there anyone else who would like to testify on this subject? Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I, again, am terribly sorry about this event having happened. As I said, we will notify everyone on the email list. We'll have public messages going out when the next committee of the whole meeting is, to have experts come and speak on possible solutions and address some of the suggestions and questions that have come up tonight. Thank you so much. Madam Mayor.
I had a question. Someone asked about funding for prevention of future outburst floods, or and so the question's for Director Koch. We're looking at all kinds of fundings, but are any of the fundings going to be available for preventive measures, or just repairing damages that have already occurred?
Through the chair to Madam Mayor, we are looking at what preventive measures are possible. That is part of the scope of what NRCS in particular is looking at.
Are there any other questions? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I know during the presentation we had previously, they mentioned reshooting LiDAR or something to better kind of know what the new channel looks like. Is that work being done?
Through the chair to Assemblymember Smith, DOT was very helpful right after the flood in running LiDAR, which was helpful. But then, of course, we know that there has been a lot of work that has happened on the river since that time. So we made an additional request to DOT about a week ago. They are working, I think they're working to find an answer of yes. And they just have, I think they have their own permitting they have to do. They have to coordinate with FAA. So it's not something that's instantaneous. But I spoke to South Coast Director Christopher Goins today, and they've been really helpful. And I think the full intent is that they will do LiDAR again for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll follow up. Director Koch, will that those LiDAR maps of the river then be made available so that people can see what has happened pre-flood, post-flood, and then at the time after the armoring?
Madam Chair, yes, we will definitely make those available in our September 18th PWFC meeting. In that packet, there was a link to a LiDAR map, and we will certainly do the same. Again, if they run LiDAR, which I expect that they will, we'll make that available probably on the website and at a public meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Koch. I see no further questions, so thank you again for coming, and we will move on to the next topic on the agenda. And that is Ordinance 2023-18 Landslide and Avalanche Hazard Regulations. Madam Manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. So if you turn to page, I'm getting there myself. If you turn to page 16 of your packet, you have a memo from me that attempts to kind of summarize where we are on this topic of hazard mapping. As you recall, we have been working through this issue since 2017, and it started with a desire to have maps that were a little bit more up to date. The current maps are from the 80s. There was a desire to separate avalanches and landslides because the current maps of record treat them both the same, and they're both different events. And so that has brought us through to this FEMA grant that the city applied for, the maps that are before you tonight, and really a lot of questions and concerns about, the accuracy of those maps. They're of course not site-specific maps, the relevancy of those maps, and all of those concerns that this body and the public has brought to you. So what you have before you today is kind of an attempt to take direction from the last assembly meeting where this was discussed. You discussed this topic at a committee of the whole, then you took public testimony on the topic at a regular assembly meeting. And where we're starting from is the end of that September committee of the whole meeting when I believe at the time it was Assemblymember Gladaszewski made a motion to repeal current code, adopt the avalanche maps only, regulate only avalanches, not adopt the landslide code, so no regulating of landslides, but post those maps on the CDD website and provide notification to the public that those maps existed, the public and the people who lived in those hazard areas. So what we took from that discussion that's being discussed in this memo, and an opportunity for the body to give us different directions. So this is again just the starting place from a logistical perspective. We took that to mean an annual postcard that would go out to people who lived within 500 feet of the mapped landslide area, and a public service announcement. And so you'll see the memo talks about that postcard going out once a year. I know there have been other ideas of notification, but just want to be clear that the notification process for landslides would be it would be procedural by staff. So the ordinance before you really just talks about avalanches and avalanche regulation, because that's the intent that we believed of the body at the last meeting. So any comments on the ordinance are specific to avalanche maps, and then if you want to take the process piece separately, maybe kind of start with ordinance, then follow up with a process piece. That might be a good way to tackle this, and I can certainly invite Attorney Palmer to walk you through that ordinance if you don't have any questions for me.
Thank you, Madam Manager. I guess we'll start with members of the Assembly if they have questions or comments on the ordinance. Mr. Palmer, would you like to walk us through it, or should we just go straight to questions?
It might be helpful if I just do a quick, maybe 30-second overview.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Kind of align things. So this ordinance is roughly 11 pages, 10 or so pages. The heart of the ordinance is section 7. So pages 7, 8, and 9, and 10 of the packet. That's the core portion of this. The decisions that this body makes tonight, or the recommendations that this body makes, we should probably focus on section 7, because the other sections are secondary issues that are wholly dependent on what happens in section 7. So with that, I would gladly take questions, or if you want more specifics, I can do more specific walkthroughs.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Palmer, does this change anything for the ability of the public to either achieve financing or insurance goals. To me, it just looked like we eliminated the slide zone, left avalanches in place, and so to me, I read this as if nothing has changed for the residents of Juneau. They still will be impacted if they want to live or build or develop or buy in this shaded area, because it's still a hazard zone. We haven't eliminated or made any improvements, is how I read this.
Mr. Attorney.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor and Assemblymember Bryson. That's a super tricky question. Let me see if I can't walk through this. So one side of the discussion is easier if the committee of the whole goes with this ordinance, and that's the repeal of the landslide component. The landslide component that's in current code, if this ordinance were to be adopted, is gone. So that part's out. But you are correct that this ordinance in concept retains the avalanche hazard areas, although they're a little different. Think of maybe a Venn diagram. Some properties are the same, some are out, some are in, so a little Venn diagram concept. We, from a regulatory perspective, if this ordinance is adopted, would still generally allow the director to permit single-family homes or a dwelling unit. Anything more than that would require a planning commission process, and there are some conditions in here that exist. Your specific question to the insurance industry and the lending industry, that's tricky. And the reason why that's tricky is we can identify areas that are hazardous, and to the extent we've done that, there's a disclaimer in this ordinance that I think would be helpful to point out. So it's on page 1 of the ordinance. It's a whereas clause, the third one down. And I'll just read it just for those that are listening. And this is directly from the Tetra Tech report. And it says the level of assessment prepared for this project is suitable for determining whether land areas could be affected by avalanches. A more detailed site-specific investigation and evaluation would be required to determine appropriate mitigations for specific properties. There's an identical disclaimer for landslides, but because we're not regulating landslides with this current draft, I'm not going to go there. So I say that we have the regulatory lever is in play for people to be able to develop on their properties for at least single-family homes. What that ultimately looks like and how people can get lending and insurance is a separate question. And could this impact that? Yes. But the question, I think, may be one of a chicken and the egg. Are we regulating because there's hazards, or are we creating the hazard? And I'll offer one idea is that we're simply regulating the current and expected conditions of the property, and insurance companies or lenders can reach the same conclusion without our maps.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Are there other questions on the ordinance itself by members of the Assembly? Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious about the language around regulating in avalanche hazard areas. I know that we had certain terms of regulation when they were just a generic hazard area that included both avalanche and landslide. The manager made some recommendations on the regulations that should be in place. The Planning Commission worked on those regulations. The regulations that are in this ordinance, is that what was originally there, or where did those terms come from?
That's a good question. Thank you, Ms. Wall. Mr. Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Assemblymember Wall. The bulk of this material on the avalanche piece, I came from CDD. I don't know how much of that was public in the past, or if there were drafts that went to the Planning Commission or possibly other assembly committees, but that's the source of this material. And some of the material is new, some of it's revised from current language specific to avalanches, and some of it is identical language from current code, just repositioned in the draft.
Ms. Wall.
Just a follow-up, is someone from CDD there?
Just one moment, Ms. Wall. We've got to turn you up. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just curious if there's someone from CDD there who could speak a little bit to that as well.
Yes. Director McLean is coming up right now.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So City Attorney Palmer is correct. And this is very much the ordinance that the Lands, Housing, and Economic Development Committee saw back in March of this year. And if my recollection is correct, this was post the second time it had gone back to the commission, and just post that. And so the commission had forwarded it, had asked for more guidance. Lands had kicked it back with a little more, and then the commission had taken more public testimony, and they resent an ordinance or recommendation, I believe it was, to the assembly that, I butchered this at Lands, and Commissioner Cole was there to save me, and she is not up here tonight to help me. But the gist of it was, they wanted a little more. They still felt like the guidance, they understood sort of the hazard, but they had concerns with risk and how that was being applied on the landslide side. But if I recall correctly, they had less concern with avalanche. And so as that moved forward with the former city manager, and it was at the committee level, we worked on this ordinance, tweaked a little bit from your discussion now in August. But yes, essentially you've seen this ordinance, and it was back in March at the Lands Committee.
Thank you, Director McLean. Ms. Wall, follow up?
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
I take that as a no follow up. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for the sound. Mr. Bryson, you had a question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think this might be for Director McLean. If we were to remove the avalanche component from this hazard zoning, and we removed avalanches and landslides, wouldn't every property, every single family home or commercial dwelling or commercial building, wouldn't it still have to go to the planning commission? It would still have to go through the permit process. So we would still be able to permit, and CDD would have its stamp of approval on any property that was built in this area anyways.
Director McLean.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I hesitate with the everys and the alls, just in case. So generally speaking, if I'm following you, Mr. Bryson, that yes, any new development is likely to either require a permit from a building permit, essentially a director's decision, or a major development permit through the Planning Commission. The value in this ordinance, in the avalanche piece, if that's what it seems like that's what you're trying to get to, is where's the value in this ordinance? So coming from that kind of perspective, then this ordinance details, exactly what the assembly supports for development in the hazard area, whether moderate and severe is what we're talking about for this ordinance, avalanche only. And so essentially the director can approve a single family home, a lot consolidation, and I can't remember the rest on the list. And then the rest is to the Planning Commission, but even then it's somewhat limited. So it comes back to, if you want to regulate development more strictly in this mapped hazard area or not. If you want to permit it just like anywhere else in the borough, then you're correct. The permit process would be no different. If I can touch back on one question from earlier too that I may help with, that was Mr. Bryson's on the what does this do, and does it help property owners in the avalanche zone? I believe it does, from what we have heard from the public. The current maps, as we've said, kind of merge or conflate the avalanche and landslide. If you've even looked at them, they're just not of a good quality. The boundaries are like really thick font. You can't, it's just not a good map. It was what we had at the time. So simply removing landslide, repealing the current ordinance completely, repealing the current maps completely, and then not regulating landslide and only adopting the avalanche maps, I do believe it helps the people that truly are in avalanche zones that are not landslide zones. So those people should be helped in many cases because it will be clear now that they are in an avalanche and not in the landslide areas. Beyond that, I think I would just concur with what Mr. Palmer said earlier as well. And that's all.
Thank you, Director McLean. Mrs. Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Director McLean, since we have you here, my apologies for not catching this piece earlier, but I was hoping you could make me help me understand this. I'm looking at page 9 of 11 of the ordinance, and give you a second to find that page. And I had looked at this earlier, it all made sense, and I just now got a bit confused, and I'm hoping you can unconfuse me. The two sections of lines that I'm looking at are going to be lines 10, 11, 12, and 23, 24, 25, and what would be 26. And it is mainly just a question to do with ADUs. So the top section says the commission may approve developments in the moderate and severe avalanche hazard areas, including ADUs, with a couple of conditions or a couple of requirements. And then we have section A and B, with which are both requirements. And then it's C that is catching me up. So it says the commission is prohibited from approving an application that increases density in the severe area, except you can authorize development of one dwelling unit. So is that one additional dwelling unit or just one single family home, or?
Is this a question for Mr. Attorney or
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe
Director McLean? Because I had the same question.
I think
Mr. Attorney.
And my apologies that I didn't see that earlier.
I think there's a little tag team operation here. So maybe to unpack this, I'll go down to lines 23 to 25. So that's a density restriction only in the severe zone. Whereas up top, if somebody wanted to add an accessory dwelling unit in a moderate zone, they could, but they would need planning commission approval. They'd have to go through the planning commission process. The director couldn't approve that with provisions lines 2 through 9 above. Does that help?
Mrs. Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it does. So then that is not an error to have, or is it potentially an error we need to? No, it's just the kind of confusing visuals.
The concept would be, sorry, Madam Deputy Mayor, the concept would be the planning commission can approve accessory dwelling units, and I'll just focus on the moderate zone. The planning commission can. The planning commission would generally be prohibited from approving dwelling units on the severe zone, except one dwelling unit per lot could be approved.
Thank you. Director McLean, do you have anything to add to that? No. Okay. Thank you. Are there further questions from Assembly members about the ordinance itself? We'll move on to Mr. Smith. I'm sorry, you're right next to me.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I had a question on page 4 of the ordinance. lines 5.5 through 7.5 or so. The striking of the last sentence there about waiving a requirement upon presentation of more specific studies. I couldn't find where maybe that, I didn't know if that language was maybe being, incorporated elsewhere, or is that pathway just being removed, and if so, why?
I'm going to look at Director McLean or Mr. Palmer. Director McLean.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And Mr. Palmer can concur, we just worked on this the other week. I believe the reason we struck it this time around was so to make the titles consistent, so that it is the Director of Engineering and Public Works that is reviewing this, not the building official for one title and the Director of Engineering and Public Works for the other title.
Mr. Smith, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess, but just so if someone comes now to the Director of Public Works and Engineering with specific studies showing that this is not likely to be in a geophysical hazard zone, that staff member is now able to waive
Mr. Palmer.
the prohibition.
Yeah, I agree with Director McLean, and it's on page 8 of your packet. You had to give me a second to find it.
Page 8 of the ordinance.
Excuse me, page 8 of the ordinance, line, let's say 13-ish. So this whole paragraph is the hazard boundary adjustment. So if the property owner believes that their property is not in the hazard zone, so that's the concept of the prior subject, then the Director of Engineering and Public Works can modify that based on whatever's submitted to them.
Okay, very good. Just wanted to check that was still a pathway. I have another question, unless anyone else.
No, I'm not seeing any.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. It's somewhat, I believe, similar to what Mr. Bryson was asking at the beginning, but well, anyway, there was a fair bit of discussion as this has gone through the Committee of the Whole and elsewhere about some type of disclaimer for the landslide maps. And I guess two-part question. One, the landslide maps, even though we're not adopting them, they will still be posted. Is the intention that they'll still be posted on the city website somewhere?
Mr. Palmer or Director McLean.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I believe, unless directed otherwise, our intent is to post the full set of maps on the website. And maybe another good example is the Willoughby District Area Plan. The Assembly did not adopt that plan in its entirety. You only adopted Chapter 5, but the entire plan lives on the CDD website. This would be similar in that same kind of example.
Thank you, Director McLean.
Follow up. Thanks. Yep. Okay. So I see that and hear that now. So I guess the disclaimer is then at the top of page 2 of the ordinance. And I think I guess my question is, have we had any confirmation from professionals in the real estate lending industry? A big thing we had heard during public testimony is, can you unring the bell now? And I guess, have we heard from anyone that this language would do that? And essentially, by just having the maps out in the world, whether or not we adopt them, have we complicated or prevented transactions of real estate in landslide designated hazard zones?
Thank you, Director McLean.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, as far as I know, unless something changed while I was gone, but I don't believe any of the insurance agents or anyone official has been willing to speak on the record for us to say one way or the other. And to be fair, my hunch is that all these properties are so different and every site varies, site by site. So for any one of them to step up, try to give a blanket statement on whether or not this solves all the problems or doesn't, I mean, I can understand why they wouldn't want to come forward in such a public fashion anyway.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Bryson.
I think I figured out the question that I want to ask and I'm trying to get answered. How does eliminating avalanches or landslides and keeping avalanches here, doing this ordinance and passing this as you guys have written it up. How does this get more housing and development built downtown? That's the part that I'm not able to grasp. I still see this as being, you guys are saying you can't get a banker to say official. They're not going to say official, but anybody that goes to try and do this, you're met with a big fat no. And so right now the answer is no across the board. How does doing this get us any closer to yes for banking or insurance? Because to me, I think that we've still left a major roadblock to development downtown, and we're having other parts of Juneau have the exact same hazards, but because we haven't touched them or acknowledged that they're a hazard zone, they don't have the financing and insurance problems that downtown does. So you can not get an answer from a banker or an insurance agent, or you can find out what the anecdotal information in the community is. You have a way harder time getting financing and insurance downtown than if you went to another part of town that might have a hazard zone. So where we haven't said that there's hazards, people don't have problems. Where we have said that there are hazards, people do have problems. I want to know, to me, this still has the problem in a way. How do we get housing developed if we're going to run into the exact same issues?
I don't know that any of our I will ask Madam Mayor to speak up. And then I see
I'll
Mrs.
speak
Scans.
a little bit to that, but I won't really answer Mr. Bryson's question. So I talked to a couple lending institutions and a couple insurance agents, and Director McLean is absolutely correct. They will not speak on the record because it's a very site specific. But as they said, this is a new era. Climate change is around us. The fact that we are going to have our maps on our website create something different because they haven't found anybody else, although I thought Sitka had them, but we'd have to confer that. But they said maps or no maps, they know downtown has landslides and avalanche. They know Mountainside Estates has landslides and avalanche. They know Thane Road has they know areas in Douglas do. So maps or no maps, they are aware. They live in the community, and they would be looking at the history of that particular house. That's what the answer they gave me.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mrs. Scandies, did you have a question or a statement? No.
Thanks, Madam Chair. No, I was just going to say, I remember that conversation, and the reason we started in 2017 is I think we've agonized over that piece of this, and I asked everybody, how do what do you think we do? But it is out of the bag, and, just that's not for staff, that's for us, and we've had plenty of 5-4 votes over it. So I hear your comments, and I appreciate that. But
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Unless someone else has a question for Director McLean, I was going to let her go and ask a question of somebody else in the audience. So the struggle I have with this is quite an internal struggle, and it's like Mrs. Hughes Candies, I have 5-4 votes within myself all the time because I'm trying to fight it's your property, you can do what you want with it, to my background of disaster response. So I'm going to ask Mr. Matisse to come to the mic. And I understand why we're not doing the landslide because that got pinpoint, but I'm with your expertise in avalanche, do you feel that the maps, I'm not going to hold you to a perfect thing, but reasonably map the avalanche hazards?
And Mr. Matisse, before you start, can you, for those who don't know you, can you give your name and your role within the city? Oh, please turn your mic on. There you go.
Madam Chair, Madam Mayor. My name is Tom Matisse. I'm the Emergency Programs Manager for the city and was hired as the Avalanche Specialist for the city in 2008 when I became a CBJ employee. The avalanche maps are done scientifically to a good standard and have been well reviewed nationally and internationally, and are very well done. When you start projecting 300-year climate models for 300-year avalanche slides, On climate change, that's debatable. And yet the avalanche maps are developed to the highest standards currently available.
Thank you. Sorry to bring you forward.
Thank you, Mr. Matisse, and thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Well, we have you up here, Mr. Matisse. I've emailed you with you before, so it's good to put a face to the to the emails. My I guess I have two goals with this ordinance. For me, I think it is important to provide some clarity to the homeowners and to the institutions that insure and lend what the risks are, and to allow people to kind of move on with their lives. But I think the most important and overriding concern for me is public safety. In your expertise, I'm assuming you've probably looked at this ordinance. Would there be elements of this ordinance that you would imagine would improve the safety of Juneau residents and homeowners?
It's
Mr. Matisse.
Chair Kelly, through the chair, please. It's important to recognize hazards and understand the hazards that affect our jurisdiction. It's difficult because, as we know, certain areas have been overstudied, and yet it's hard to ignore the history of events. Regardless of the maps, the history of events stands, and people look at those history of events, which is why Madam Mayor mentioned Mountainside Estates, for example. But acknowledging hazards is important to do, and developing hazard models around those is important to do. I think you're making good decisions. The difficulties here regarding landslide and avalanche, from my perspective, is that avalanche is very well versed in magnitude and frequency, as where landslide is more of 1,000-year models and not 100-year models. So it's a newer science with a little less behind it, which makes it difficult to accept at face value. But I think the moves that you guys are making are completely understandable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you, Mr. Matisse. Are there further questions? I see no further questions. Madam Mayor, do you have a motion for me?
Of course I do. I'm the head of the chair. I move ordinance 2023-18 V Cal 1 to the full assembly for consideration.
Mr. Smith, do I see a
Thanks. Objection for the purpose of
objection?
the question.
Thank
Yeah. Ms. Kester, what is the timing for, I actually don't know, does this ordinance to be introduced? What's the expected timing on this?
Thank you. Madam Manager, can we have that timing?
Yeah, we can introduce this at the upcoming November 13th assembly meeting.
And that would be for introduction, and then the following assembly meeting for public comment.
Correct. And then public hearing is in the December meeting, which I should have committed to memory, but don't quite yet. 11th. Thank you.
December 11th. Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thanks. Just a little bit of a brief comment on it. I'm trying to keep this moving through. I want to probably work. Excuse me. Thank you. Just a brief comment on this. I'm good to keep this moving. I think I may take a look with the attorney just on and reaching out to members of the real estate professional industries and stuff about the disclaimer. Can we unring the bell? Is there language that would do that? I do have, I guess, we've discussed this elsewhere about sending these postcards to people in these mapped areas saying, oh, you may live in a hazard zone or whatever. That's fine. I think we'd also have to admit, though, that we're not sending postcards to people that live in hazard areas because we haven't analyzed that across the whole borough. The cost may be prohibitive, whatever, but there's some sense of fairness there. But I think this overall it's moving us in the right direction, and we shouldn't let perfection be the good. So thank you.
And you remove your objection.
I do.
Thank you. I see Mr. Bryson has his hand up.
I am going to object as well. I do believe that we can unring this bell. I believe that if we repeal the 1987 maps, we are unringing the bell, and we are allowing this community to develop the way they want to. People can develop what they want to on their lands. And it's not like we're saying you're carte blanche and you can go build whatever you want, because every single person that wanted to build in an area that may potentially have an avalanche or a landslide still has to get it permitted through CDD. They have to come up with enough financial resources. If they're getting a loan, they're going to have bank approval. So the best thing that we can do is get the 1987 ordinance out of the way. That's how we unring the bell. And forgive me for using this term, but the common sense of you got to have a lot of money to build buildings and to build homes, and people are going to be as cautious as their risk will allow on the property that they own when they're using their own resources. And we can unring the bell, as Mr. Smith said, by repealing all this. So I'm going to maintain my objection. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. We have a motion and we have an objection, and I think we can call roll. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor, for the introduction, forwarding ordinance 2023-18 version Cal 1 to the Assembly for introduction. Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Mr. Bryson.
No.
Ms. Hughes Scandies.
Yes.
Ms. Atkinson.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Walahida.
Yes.
Ms. Wall.
Yes.
And Deputy Mayor Hill.
Yes.
Motion carries 8-1.
We have one more item on the agenda, the general direction on tourism management. Is everyone willing to go that, or do we need a break?
It was my understanding that we were going to be considering the ordinance and then considering process. So I did have a question on the previous item about process.
We're not going to consider process, but however, let me take a brief 3-minute break.
All right.
And I will make it 5. We will be back here on my cell phone at 7:18.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. We don't have all our members. We bring the committee of the whole back to order, and Mr. Kelly and I spoke, and his question was, I had said we're going to look at the ordinance first, and then if there are any questions on the memo, which he was calling the process. So, Mr. Kelly, I think you had a question on the memo, please.
Thank you. So I, being a new assembly member, I'm just kind of curious about how things are implemented in general. I know I remember some of the discussions earlier, and the kind of ensuring that the people were notified seemed very important to the assembly members, and I see that's why you put in your memo that it is the intention to put out these postcards on a regular basis to homeowners, and I'm just kind of curious that's something that's not spelled out in the ordinance, like how is that sort of thing normally implemented internally?
Madam Manager.
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify, Assemblymember Kelly. So CDD does hold a calendar with reminders for all sorts of things because they are in the process of sending out notifications for many different things. And so this item would go on their annual calendar for notification. Likely, we would send out a postcard and issue a PSA when the Assembly passes the ordinance. And then we would set it on an annual basis sometime in late summer, early fall, because of course, we're kind of in our most high-risk landslide season right now before the soils freeze and when we get really heavy rains.
Mr. Kelly?
I think that works for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for the answer. Madam Mayor.
So that poses another question. If we're not adopting the landslide maps, why would we be sending the people in landslide possible hazards?
Madam Manager.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That is the direction that staff has gleaned from all the previous conversations on this, that it was important to notify, and that notification should, the proposal is that it's within 500 feet of people in those map zones. If you'd like to give different direction, now would be the time, and we'd be happy to change that process.
Madam Mayor, are you interested in entertaining different direction?
Not at this time. Let's see what the Assembly does.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We will now move on to the last item on our agenda, general direction on tourism management. And we have Alex Pierce here to talk us through her question. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So I'm here tonight to ask the Assembly for extremely high level direction with the idea that that gives me the marching orders to drill down and come back to the body with options, tools, levers that we can use to manage visitor volume. So we ended this season at 1.638 million passengers. That's 30% growth from 2019, which was our previous busiest year ever. And our numbers are level for 2024 and 2025. We're looking at about the same number of visitors per year. Our busy days with the 5-ship limit going into effect in 2024 will be less busy. our busiest days. This year we're about 20,000 people, 21,000. We're looking at like 17,000 or in our busiest days with the limit in effect. So has had a moderating effect and has provided a plateau for us to step back and reconsider. And that 5-ship limit for the new members who I talked to you both as candidates. So we have had this conversation, but I know you had a lot of conversations as candidates. So the 5-ship limit is based on direction from the Visitor Industry Task Force, which Mayor Weldon launched in 2019. It produced a report. I say I was staff to produce a report in 2020, and that is really the meat of our tourism strategy, and it's a good strategy. But like any strategy, as you're implementing it, there are things that you need to think about and reconsider. And so we contemplated the 5-ship limit, and with the idea of the potential for an additional dock, and based on 1.3 million visitors. We took a break during the pandemic. We came back with a season of 1.1 million people that kind of, we were busting the rust off. The industry was getting going again. And then we went into this year, which would have been the product of kind of consistent growth, but ended up being a really big jump. And we received a lot of public comment. We received a lot more TBMP calls than we have in the past. And we've had a lot of input from the community asking us what we're doing about tourism growth, what we're doing about tourism volume. We are doing our community surveys. We do a survey every fall asking the community what about their feelings on tourism, and we have some questions that we do year over year. That survey will be complete. I think they're almost done calling, and we'll have a draft document to talk through at the retreat. We'll also have the results of our passenger survey at the retreat. I saw preliminary results today. People love Juneau. That's the summary. We're still a kind of marquee destination, which is great. And that all goes to say that for 2026 and beyond, we need to think about our strategy in a high level way. Do we want to work to grow visitation? Do we want to work to kind of maintain the status quo, recognizing that there are a number of infrastructure projects that we can do to help things feel less busy? There's a lot of work that we're doing right now to Eagle Crest, the glaciers, doing work that will likely lead to an increase in the number of glacier permits that'll help kind of manage and balance volume? Or did this summer feel like too much, and we want to work to reduce the number of visitors? And with that, in any of those categories, there are a lot of different mechanisms that we can use. We've used negotiated agreements to this point. They've worked well. But without that broad direction on what we're doing next, it's challenging for me to chart our next steps. So as we said in the meeting with Mayor Weldon and Deputy Mayor Hale this morning, I'm really here asking for and so with that, I'm happy to take questions and talk through anything that especially the new members have questions or concerns about, recognizing that you're going to see a lot of me, and we're going to talk through whatever we end up doing with all the other tourism management stuff we're doing quite a bit over the coming months.
So before we give Ms. Pierce, the thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. Are there any questions? Ms. Atkinson?
Yeah, I actually, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. I was curious if you'd seen any of those passenger reviews for some of the later passengers in terms of such a long season. I know we had such nice weather, but I know some shops were also closed during that time period, and I was wondering what the visitor experience was like there, if you saw anything like that.
Thank you. And through the chair, I haven't. I only saw the tables with percentages. I haven't seen any of the comments yet.
I have Mr. Bryson, Mr. Smith, and Mr. Kelly. Oh, I have Ms. Wall.
Oh, Madam Chair, were you calling on me?
Oh, look at me. I'm like, acknowledged.
Ms. Wall.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. If I wave my hand like that, it's just to make sure you see me. I'm not trying to be impatient over here.
I am certain, and I appreciate it.
My question is, I know we know at this stage that if we were to just kind of maintain our current tools and directions, we would see kind of flattening over the next 2 years. But based on your knowledge, if we kind of do nothing, if we decide, no more tools, are we going to continue to see growth? Would that be your expectation?
Ms. Pierce.
I think that's through the chair. That's a variable answer depending on the number of cruise ship docks we have in Juneau. But to speak in a little more detail, ships are getting bigger. Alaska remains a popular market, and Juneau we really drive the numbers for Alaska. Vancouver and Seattle are our two home ports. Vancouver's considering adding an additional berth. What we do in Juneau makes a big difference in their decision. So because we are geographically kind of the center of the network, and we're also, I'm told repeatedly by the industry, we can't sell Alaska without Juneau. I don't know if that's true or if they just need to work harder on marketing. But I do think that we would see growth, whether coming through ship size or increased home port capacity if we do nothing. And certainly an additional facility that could accommodate large ships would help to drive growth.
Thank you, Ms. Pierce. I have Mr. Bryson, Mr. Smith, Mr. Kelly, and then Ms. Euskandis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I had good questions. Then you threw me off. Let me leave it to questions. We're at question time, right?
Yes, we are.
All right.
We are.
So, do you have numbers for the amount of tourists that were here during the April time period and the October time period? Would that be in the shoulder seasons that maybe there were a couple of April dates and a couple of October dates, but in previous tour seasons, we haven't had weeks of April and October. So out of the 1.638, I'd be curious how many, was that 100,000 landed on the shoulder season, 100,000 in April, 100,000 in October? Because if we're comparing apples to previous apple seasons, if the shoulder seasons have a couple 100,000, I mean, we're talking about the day impacts.
Yes.
So if you had numbers on what the shoulder seasons, where those numbers are at, and then if you could speak to maybe operator capacity. The previous year that you mentioned that was only 1.1, operators had a very difficult time turning on here, the local Juneau operators. This season, they had a slightly better time getting their operations turned on. And from my conversations with the operators, that they anticipate that next season will be even better for capacity. And then by the next year, we'll have the gondola will be online. Could you maybe speak to how operator capacity or lack of operator capacity would have impacted that visitor experience during this time period? We have the highest number, we have a lower than expected operator capacity. How does that impact things?
You just managed to slip two questions in there, Mr.
Sorry,
Bryson. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Assembly Member Bryson. To address the shoulder season number piece, I don't have those exact numbers in front of me. I'm happy to look them up and email the Assembly tomorrow. I will say that the April, October, early and late ships are one line, and it's just a couple ships. So even in and it's kind of expanded by a week on either end every year for the last few years. So even in 2019, we had an earlier and later season than we had previously. It was that one line, it was those same few ships. 2022, we had those same couple ships for a week or so longer on either side. And then this year we had those same couple ships for a week longer. So I don't think it's a huge amount of people. I don't think we're looking at hundreds of thousands. I think we're looking at tens of thousands. I mean, they're big ships. They're like 5,000 passenger ships, so they add up quickly. But I don't think the shoulder seasons have a major measurable impact. They are something that there's challenging weather, and I have received a lot of feedback about discomfort with the season extending so long from both business owners and residents, but I don't think it has a major impact on our numbers. And as we move into talking about numbers and capacity, I think it's important to think about things on a daily basis rather than a season-wide basis. It's not so much we had 1.64 million people this year. It's more, how did our days feel, and what were the impacts, and what can we work to change? To answer the second part of your question about operator capacity, there is some truth to that. Some of the operators probably do have more capacity. We're kind of at our limits with our high volume activities based on the public feedback that we've received. Whale watching, we've had a lot of discussion about whale watching this year. And so if that industry turns back on more, that probably means more boats or more impact. The helicopters haven't really grown or shrunk much since the early 2000s. They're working off the same Forest Service permit that they've had since 2001. So that industry, which impacts some residents a lot, has kind of maintained the status quo. Glacier tours was a huge impact this year, and we had operators running out of permits in mid-July. So the bottleneck there wasn't necessarily operator capacity, it was the number of permits issued by the Forest Service. So there is certainly room in our shore excursion market for operators to turn back on to, as you say, to operate more shore excursions. But our big high volume things, the tram was really busy this year. I don't know that there's room to increase capacity in those things without a planning process by the Forest Service completing and them constructing the parking lot and trails that they're talking about for 2026. Eagle Crest coming back online, or coming online, and perhaps some new opportunities or growth in other markets beyond the ones that I've mentioned.
Thank you. We've got a long list of people, so I'll try to ask us to keep our questions relatively short and the answers relatively short. We still have a robust discussion before we do our, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Ms. Pierce, you said it earlier. What was our peak days this year, and where do you forecast them being? I think you were saying for the calendar year 24 season.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, through the chair. I don't have exact numbers, but our peak days were around 21,000 this year, and they're forecasted to be 17,000 something in the 2024 season.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Good question. I have Mr. Kelly, Ms. Hughes-Gandies, Madam Mayor, and Ms. Wall. So, Mr. Kelly.
Actually, I think I'll pass on my question for
Okay,
now.
thank you. Ms. Hughes-Gandies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So just to follow up on that, so what I understand you saying is you don't think the shoulder season is how we got from 1.3 to 1.6, or it was minimal. Okay. I guess some of what I have are comments now based on everyone else's questions, so maybe I'll wait. You just mentioned the whale watching, which is something we've talked about a lot. Could you remind me where we are with the limited entry, or if we're still, if it's us, or if they're still talking?
Thank you, Madam Ms. Hughes-Gandies, through the chair. The whale watching group is still meeting and talking, and I have been out for the last few weeks, but Attorney Palmer and I do have a bit of a research project on limited entry.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes-Gandies. Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Madam Mayor, and then Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is kind of just a feed off of Mr. Smith's question. Limiting the number per day, is that because you have more control over our scheduling than you had in the past? Is that why we're seeing a potential less number during the day, and we can always control the number a little bit with our docs?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through the chair, short answer, yes. Long answer, slightly longer answer, the 5-ship limit is the main reason. And we do have more control over the schedule, so we can look at numbers in our docs in a more serious way as one of the future levers that I mentioned earlier.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Chair Hale.
Just a sec, Ms. Wall, we've got to turn you up. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Hale. I was curious about the timing, or if we have any initial results from the survey that would have been done this year. If I'm not mistaken, we probably surveyed both residents and visitors this year.
Ms. Pierce.
Thank you. Through the chair, Assemblymember Cole, we will have survey results at the end of this month, early December. So you'll have, hopefully for the retreat, we'll have results from both the resident survey and the visitor survey. We also did an economic impact study as part of the visitor survey. Those results are a little bit delayed because the consultant is waiting on sales tax data from us and on CPP data from the state.
Thank you. I have one question, and then we'll bring it back to the Assembly. You had mentioned in your memo that you're working with other communities in Southeast Alaska on a regional organization. And I think, can you just speak to that a little bit and just explain a little bit the ramifications of decisions that happen here on other communities, et cetera?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Absolutely. We've had a loose group that called Port Communities of Alaska that started meeting during COVID and has kept meeting monthly. And it's kind of driven by the communities that get big visitor numbers: Juneau, Skagway, Ketchikan, Sitka, with some of the smaller communities kind of drifting in and out as their as things are relevant to them. We met at Southeast Conference as in person and discussed the idea of further formalizing our organization. Likely under AML, Ms. Huskandis has been helping me in her day job capacity with that project, and with the idea that we would have a centralized group that could potentially hold contracts. So, for example, our survey contract, if we wanted to do our survey throughout Southeast Alaska and use Juneau's model because we've been doing it for a long time and it's been successful, we could do that under Port Communities of Alaska. I won't say all, but most of the other cruise tourism destinations in the world have organizations of this type. They're formalized in different ways depending on the model, but we're unique in that we haven't had an organized body to this point. To the second part of your question, Juneau, we're the big port. We're geographically central. We get 99% of the ships. So the things that we do really affect other communities, and but anything that happens in a community affects the other communities in the region. If Sitka has ballot initiatives right now and is working towards perhaps doing a negotiated agreement as an alternative to some of the things being proposed by the ballot initiatives, and if Sitka cut visitation in half, that would have big ramifications for other ports in the region. So it's important that we work together, that we make these decisions in a collaborative way, and we try to collectively figure out what a sustainable tourism industry in Southeast Alaska looks like. And I think after formalizing, that's kind of the big meaty question for the group is, where do we go from here, and what is sustainability? We're having that conversation in Juneau, but we need to then move that conversation to the regional level.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pierce. What I'd like to do now is, rather than do a formal motion, just do the thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. And I'll just say thumbs up or thumbs down don't mean, like, if we do a thumbs up, we're not saying, like double the passengers. If we do a thumbs down, we're not saying half the passengers. We're trying to give Ms. Pierce broad direction so that she can then come to the assembly retreat on December 3rd, is it? Second, on December 2nd, with details about how we might, what's that?
Just reminded Mr. Smith.
Oh, with details about how we might go about some directions that we can take. So at this point, I'd like to ask assembly members to do, and you all on Zoom have to do this too, to just do our up, sideways, or down. And up means increase, sideways means maintain about the same, down means decrease, but not in any great detail. So 1, 2, oh, Mr. Smith, you have a question.
I guess a process question. I'm okay with this. I will say, as we've all have the experience of having when we do yes/no questions at candidates forums, there's always a little bit something more. So my more is going to be maintain while continuing to aggressively manage tourism to reduce impacts on residents.
Well, that might just be our maintain then. That is the maintain. Ms. Huskandis.
I'm confused by your comment, Madam Chair, just now.
So he said maintain while continue to reduce impacts.
Aggressively manage tourism to reduce impacts on residents.
Are you previewing your answer, Mr. Smith, or you're? I think he's just adding to the end of whatever wins.
That's just his answer.
Okay, so Madam Mayor, process-wise, do I just do the vote now on a 1, 2, 3? Thank you. We're going to do this. It's not binding, yes. Although I will say that I see Mr. Sabatini with his camera. Okay.
Madam
so-
Deputy Mayor,
Yes.
can you freeze for a few moments so I can record everybody's
I will freeze
thumb?
and I will ask those on Zoom to freeze as well. So 1, 2, 3.
You got them?
Thank you.
You got us all? Okay.
Madam Chair, so that those of us online know
Okay,
how
so
everyone else.
Ms. Wall.
I can follow up on this, but just to note that those of us online can't see how our colleagues are voting, so I'd love to get that information at some point.
Okay, and I'm sorry. Madam Clerk, can you turn her volume down? And then can you report this back to us?
Yes, I can.
In real time.
So everyone's thumbs were down with the exception of Mr. Bryson, who had a neutral thumb, if I recorded that properly.
No, we had more neutrals.
I'm sorry, I was seeing downward. So when you're doing this, I'm seeing down. Thank you for that clarification. So I have down Mr. Smith, Miss Weldon.
Wait, Mr. Smith are you down or neutral?
I'm even while actively managing.
Okay, so
So if I might, Madam Chair, can we just have a show of hands? Who's neutral? Okay, I have 3 neutrals. And who is down? I have 4, 5, 6 down. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and that was an interesting way to take a vote. I'm not sure I really like it, but there we have it. And I was the one that led the charge. Thank you all, and thank you, Ms. Pierce, and I look forward to robust discussion at future meetings, including at our retreat. We will be definitely spending some time on this, and there are some definitely some ideas. Madam Mayor.
Speaking of our retreat on December 2nd, we're going to be there probably early. Sorry, Ms. Hughes Candies. We haven't totally set the time, but be prepared to be there early and look in your email because Mr. Barr has sent an email regarding our goals because we're going to do a lot of homework before our retreat. If you want to have a say, keep checking your email, even if you just search for Mr. Barr, and he's got a couple little surveys for us. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our next committee of the whole meeting is December 18th, 2023 at 6 p.m. and we are adjourned.
How much lower do you want it?
What's that?
How much lower do you want it?